Why does the most incompetent employee at your company always seem to get the promotion? Why does that colleague who confidently spouts nonsense get taken more seriously than you, who hesitates before weighing in on complex issues? There's a disturbing pattern repeating itself all around us, in corporations, in politics, even in friend groups. Those who know the least often end up commanding those who understand the most. And it's no coincidence. Arthur Schopenhauer, a 19th century German philosopher, devoted part of his work to deciphering this puzzle. His conclusion was brutal. Ignorance isn't just tolerated by power, it's a competitive advantage for seizing it. The explanation goes far beyond politics. It touches the core of human nature, revealing how our most primitive instincts create perfect conditions for mediocrity to triumph over competence. In this video, we'll explore why the very structure of human society favors the least qualified, and how recognizing these patterns can protect us from being manipulated by them. The German philosopher, known for his radical pessimism and his ability to see through human illusions, wasn't one for half measures or easy consolations. Unlike Hegel, who had an optimistic view, Schopenhauer said that social reality was nothing more than a reflection of something much deeper and more disturbing about human nature. According to Hegel, his intellectual adversary at the time, everything in history was rational and progressive. For Hegel, every historical moment, including tyrannies, wars, catastrophes, was a natural unfolding of the world's spirit perfecting itself, improving, as if the Middle Ages were progress compared to ancient times, as if we were always evolving. Schopenhauer, on the contrary, saw this theory as a dangerous farce. For him, the truth was much more brutal. History isn't rational progress, but blind chance. And it's precisely this understanding that explains why, even in the 21st century, we're still governed by idiots. To understand Schopenhauer's view, we need to grasp his concept of will, presented in the book The World as Will and Representation. In the book, Schopenhauer explains that the world isn't governed by reason, by what we can mentally represent, but by a blind and irrational will that drives all existence. Imagine this force as an uncontrolled engine that doesn't know where it's going, just accelerates chaotically. It doesn't favor intelligence or virtue, but only those who will be lucky enough to stay in power. So think for a second, who has the best conditions to remain in power? Contrary to what we imagine, it's not exactly the most prepared, as Machiavelli would say, the most intelligent or the most ethical, but rather the least capable. Schopenhauer explains that there are numerous reasons why idiots are better adapted to power. First, because they have more hunger for power since they can't identify their own limitations. Unlike the wise, they think they're better than others and consider themselves capable of governing, while the more intelligent, with sharp knowledge, recognize their flaws, which makes them more hesitant. Thus, it's much more common to see ignorant people seeking leadership and management positions than intelligent ones. And as if this weren't enough, mediocrity brings numerous practical advantages. Less intelligent people are more decisive because they don't see the complexity of problems, more confident because they don't understand risks, and more popular because they speak simply in ways that resonate with the masses. In other words, the proverb that says ignorance is bliss has never been more true. Think for a few seconds about political leaders, about popular people from school days. Weren't they the most mediocre? Leadership positions always end up going to mediocre people because most people are intellectually limited and naturally identify with leaders who mirror their own capabilities. Schopenhauer believed that genius and wisdom are rare, while stupidity is abundant. So in a democracy, the numbers favor the mediocre. Furthermore, Schopenhauer saw politics as a theater of vanities where envy, competition, and ego predominate. For him, the political arena was nothing more than a stage where mediocre actors compete for applause from an audience that can't distinguish between performance and real competence. Truly wise people, according to Schopenhauer, would tend to distance themselves from this toxic environment, leaving the field open for those driven by unbridled ambition. Imagine politics as a big circus. Who are the ones shouting loudest for attention? The clowns. And who stays backstage, critically observing? The intelligent directors, who know that stepping into the ring means subjecting themselves to ridicule. The German philosopher perceived that politics corrupts even the best intentions. He argued that the very act of seeking political positions and influence already reveals a problematic nature. After all, who would want to seek influence and recognition from mediocre people? For Schopenhauer, this created a perfect, vicious cycle, the most qualified refuse to participate in politics' dirty game, while the least qualified throw themselves headfirst into it. This view explains why, even centuries later, we continue watching the same spectacle. People with deep knowledge of economics rarely become finance ministers. Brilliant educators avoid positions in the education ministry, and public health experts flee from health policy. Power, ironically, repels exactly those who should exercise it. Despite this observation, it doesn't mean we should give up. It's not because ignorance tends to win power that we should do nothing about it. On the contrary, it's precisely because of this that we must resist. Hannah Arendt, a German philosopher who witnessed the horrors of totalitarianism, coined a devastating term to explain the rise of ignorance: the crisis of responsibility. For her, the problem isn't just in the tyrants who rise to power, but in the complicit silence of those who could resist. It's the moral laziness of the intelligent, the intellectual cowardice of the capable, the conformism of those who know better. Think of the teacher who gives up on educating rebellious students, saying, "I'm not paid for this." They abdicate their fundamental responsibility, leaving an entire generation at the mercy of ignorance. Or parents who, seeing their children repeat prejudices and lies learned on the internet, prefer to avoid confrontation, saying, "It's just a phase." But the most tragic example is of educated people who passively watch while misinformation spreads like plague. How many doctors stay silent while charlatans sell miracle cures? How many economists remain quiet while politicians promise the impossible? How many historians stay mute while the past is rewritten by opportunists? But you might be thinking, of course nobody resists. Whoever challenges the system pays dearly. And you're right, partially. Frontal resistance has, in many eras, been an act of suicide. However, there are intelligent ways to resist without becoming a martyr. I'll share 2 tactics that allow us to combat systemic stupidity without suffering consequences. First strategy: carefully choosing our battlegrounds. There's no point trying to dialogue with the conspiracy theorist uncle at the family barbecue who believes the earth is flat. It's a waste of energy to debate with a coworker who compulsively shares fake news without even reading the headlines, or to argue with that acquaintance who turns any conversation into a political platform. Reserve your intellectual energy for people genuinely open to dialogue. The curious student who asks difficult questions, the friend who admits when they're wrong, the family member who asks for reading recommendations. Revolution begins in fertile ground, not in deserts. Second strategy: recognize our degree of involvement and attack strategically. Pierre Bourdieu teaches us that the more implicated we are in a power structure, the more our opinion is subject to it. The employee can't openly criticize the company. They have bills to pay. The politician must defend their party. Their career depends on it. The contracted journalist must follow the editorial line or lose their job. But here's the secret: recognize where you're not implicated and attack there with all your strength. The intern can criticize absurd corporate practices. They have nothing to lose. The retiree can denounce the corruption they witnessed. They no longer depend on the system. Use your freedom where it exists. While these strategies teach us to face stupidity subtly, nothing prevents you from confronting it head-on without necessarily ending up at the stake, as happened to Giordano Bruno. Beethoven is the perfect example of this. While the music of his time degenerated into superficial entertainment for nobility, he resisted with creative fury. Deaf, isolated, misunderstood, he continued composing symphonies that challenged the easy tastes of his era. His Ninth Symphony wasn't just music, It was an act of resistance against cultural mediocrity. Van Gogh followed a similar path. While the art market rewarded flattering portraits and decorative landscapes, he painted with an emotional intensity that nobody understood. He sold only one painting in his lifetime, was considered mad, but never gave in to the temptation to paint what would sell. Each brushstroke was an act of resistance against the aesthetic superficiality of his time. By resisting, you might be seen as arrogant, difficult, problematic. Solitude will be your most frequent companion. The mediocre will unite against you because your mere existence reminds them of their limitations. It's an arduous path, without doubt. But here's the question that nullifies all negative consequences. What do you gain by seeking recognition from idiots? What's the point of being king of the idiots? Edmund Husserl, father of phenomenology, offers us a revolutionary perspective on this question. For him, objective power, positions, titles, influence, doesn't automatically convert to subjective happiness. What really matters isn't how many people you influence, but how you experience your own existence. It's better to have deep influence over 5 intelligent people than superficial influence over millions of fools. Husserl reveals to us that reality is constructed by our perception, by how we experience the world. A wise beggar can experience more existential fulfillment than an ignorant billionaire. The quality of experience surpasses any quantity of power or wealth. Think of Heidegger, who chose to trade the university rectorship for a cabin in the Black Forest, away from academic spotlights. Or Thoreau, who went to Walden Pond to live deliberately, rejecting the empty values of industrial society. Both understood a fundamental truth. It's possible to be infinitely happier living authentically in the forest than being a movie star imprisoned by their own image. The phenomenon, how we perceive and experience the world, is all we truly possess. And here's the final paradox that Schopenhauer already intuited. By seeking quality over quantity, depth over surface, authenticity over popularity, we end up living lives infinitely richer than any mediocre tyrant could ever imagine. The choice in the end is yours. Be one more in the crowd that applauds the idiots in power, or have the courage to think, resist, and live on your own terms. Schopenhauer already warned us, the second option is harder, but it's the only one worth it.